gotten to, as the title, The Dirty Laundry, which actually opens with some pretty nice quotes.
Yeah.
I've actually thought both of these were really good frame for the chapter as well. People commonly feel that because I am considered a living Buddha, I must experience only serenity, perpetual happiness, and have no worries. Unfortunately, this is not so. As a High Lama and incarnation of enlightenment, I know better.
Overall, that vibe does carry through the chapter, and I did enjoy this chapter for the push to reflect that it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this sort of, as much as we strive for enlightenment and awakening, and we may get that sometimes, but at the end of the day, we are, after all, still human, and we do have bodies, and we do have various needs, and if we ignore them, that's when they get us. It's only
Right.
by paying attention to them that we can move beyond them.
Well, and even to the degree of it really pushes you to look at yourself and what degree of authority you might have over people and are using it appropriately and um yeah, it I don't know. I liked that the chapter did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very important points that he brought up in this chapter, and a lot of relevant examples. There were, let's see, summarizing, opens talking about discriminating wisdom, and that
Mhm.
we have within us a certain wisdom, uh, kind of inherently, and that despite all of these problems, or maybe because of all of these position or major areas of difficulty, as he says, we should always kind of like trust that little inner voice of compassion and discriminating wisdom that we have, that even when in the face of these things, that not just because they have power, authority, or that they're a renowned teacher doesn't mean that they are immune to these things, and that they can fall to power and money and sexuality and intoxicants.
I think also though what this section that you've got on the screen does is it points out that if a teacher has fallen to those things, that doesn't mean they've never said any truth before. And
Mm-hmm.
so somewhere on the page 140 it says to look honestly at what is wise and healthy and what is unwise and unhealthy, independent of any text or teaching or authority. And I have been kind of living by that creed for a few years now of
Mm-hmm.
trying to see things independently of their sources. Um, Not to fully separate them because context can be very meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
but that in both directions, right? Like what you were saying of don't take it for unwavering truth just because you trust the source unwaveringly or you're maybe inclined to. But I think the same is true of like just because that source is maybe shown some untrustworthiness in some sections doesn't mean you can't take any truth from that the words.
Right. There can be really great things that that person lived by, even if they made a grave error in some other way,
Yeah.
or they have some critical weakness. But yeah, they could have still spread a lot of really great teachings,
Mhm.
and that's a pretty commonly, what is it? Commonly used logical fallacy.
Yeah.
That like, because you're wrong about this thing, therefore everything you say must be wrong. But that's not inherently true. I mean, maybe you might question it more because they have shown some kind of error in judgment or
um just below
behavior.
that I also highlighted this. Well, I highlighted the second half, but I'll read the whole little sentence. Just as we have to recognize when our literal laundry is dirty and needs to be washed, the first step in attending to any problem is an honest appraisal of what is so. And I like that because I think the core of any good teaching is really this sense of mindfulness, right? Like of being mindful of what is what is literally here, not just what am I imposing on it, what am I what schema am I seeing it through, but like how is it actually in the reality of it.
Uh-huh. And something he didn't actually really talk about too much. I think he's aware of it, but didn't really go into it
Mm-hmm.
much. Was that we? I think sometimes we're kind of afraid to see what's there, but the only way
Mm-hmm.
you can fix it is if you see what's there in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. So being afraid of it doesn't make it ever better or make it not exist. Denial
Right.
of the truth is doesn't make some alternate reality true. I mean, maybe it does kind of in your mind, but it's not actually changing what anyone's doing or how
Right.
they're affecting others. So, yeah, some good points in this. Very real problems. I highlighted on under the why difficulties happen section.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, where is it? Here, at the end of here. The part of us that knows its limitations can navigate the dangers of liberation's flight. But if we forget we are human, if a part of us thinks it can soar upward without any limits, then flight itself will abandon us and we will inevitably be plunged into the dark sea.
I also noted that section.
Very nice, very nice.
So we're on the same wavelength with that one, I think.
So that's his first I he says this is the like cause
Mm-hmm.
of the difficulties, but I think it's also the first step in addressing them or healing them or avoiding that happening again is to recognize there are limitations, find out what they are, and then respect them.
Yeah. Let's see. I was interested a little bit in some of the stories and examples he gave, but I didn't highlight a lot on some of these pages.
I did like this bit here when he's talking about isolation, saying that the longing to be rescued, to find someone who knows the truth in this confusing world, is the basis for many communities of mindless followers. So, like, another
Mm-hmm.
thing that we can be. I mean, first, that's very. I think that's very true. My mom's been watching some documentary on Netflix about Ivy Ridge. It's very interesting. It's like
Hmm.
a weird cult school, but it's not a school. It's kind of a prison for what they said called troubled youth, but actually they're just basically normal kids with super religious parents that kind of bought into like this cult mentality or
That sounds
didn't know
familiar. I'm wondering if I've
about.
also either seen the documentary or read some or something.
Yeah, like saw the news articles or something
I
because
saw
there
because
were
it sounds so
lawsuits.
familiar. Something about that story is ringing a bell for sure.
Yeah, they had multiple schools and then they had lawsuits and like the government shut them down and all this. But yeah, it's a really interesting and kind of tying it together. I mean, that is also a religious sort of cult mentality that happened there. But I like this this point of it's not like it's so easy to just be like, oh well, these people are crazy, but a lot of people aren't actually. They just are desperate and they want it to be true, and they'll overlook so much
Mm-hmm.
just to convince themselves that it is and that this could save them. They
Well,
want to
yeah,
be
as he
rescued.
points out, pretty much it's very human, right? Like that we are looking for that our selves are deeply searching for that sense of connection, and it comes out in that way sometimes when it's twisted and toxic.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, that he kind of summed that up really well here too. At the end of this page, our human capacity for self-deception is almost as vast as our capacity for awakening.
Yeah, that
That's a good
was
caution.
That was a good. It is so true, though.
Oh, and that bit after, because questioning the teachers puts us in touch with our own shadow and pain. Students deny that abuses exist and carry on as before in spite of the obvious, painful truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my mind, I'm always overlaying so much information I have in my head, which is not advisable. I don't recommend existing in this way, right? Like, that's not what I should be doing. But immediately, I'm thinking about people who go through trauma, people who others maybe don't understand. Like, why do you keep returning to your abuser? Or kids who seem to still love their parents despite atrocities that have happened to them. And it's just such a painfully real thing that happens not just in communities of Sangha, but on just so many different levels of human relationships.
Yeah. And then it gets complicated because in all of those situations, I think there's a social expectation or framework that says that these relationships are important by the nature of them, that they just have an inherent value, and that you should, despite all of these problems,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's in these kinds of religious or spiritual communities or within a family or in a, I don't know, a marriage or something. There's a way it ought to be,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes that way, the expectation is at odds with what's actually happening. I mean, big problem when some you have a relationship, it's two ways, and if one person is, oh well, you're supposed to love your parents unconditionally and appreciate everything they've done for you, and
Uh-huh.
even if they, messed up and did all kinds of things they also weren't supposed to do, but they did their best and blah blah blah. And that could be true. But if the parents also not returning that same effort, right? It, that's where it's really toxic. It's not like they're just doing their best. If they sometimes are just actively, I don't know, trying to make themselves feel better through their children, isn't
Mm-hmm.
really doing their best for their children, now you don't have a reciprocated relationship. You have a very one sided one, and that's just a recipe for more pain and more suffering, and maybe not possible for that person to heal when they continue to have that kind of relationship. If they don't have a proper distance to say, like, no, that mentality isn't really correct. And there's a way to forgive them and understand that they're people, they're human, and they make mistakes, and there's reasons for what they've done, but also not continue to subject yourself to that or to see what's really there.
Yeah. I
I know, obviously, you've lived through it, so.
Yeah, no, I get it. Additionally, I will say it was kind of interesting to me how I got pushed continually to something I'm doing in my classroom in my mind, and I'm hoping it means I'm doing the right thing. um, it is a bit of a tangent.
It's fine.
I start a lot of my classes after the initial welcome to art class, blah blah blah. We have a
Mm-hmm.
class mantra we do. It's a call and response. And I can't take credit for it. I did take it from another art teacher, but my students have really taken to it, which is, so I say one phrase and they repeat it back to me, which is, I make messes, I make mistakes, but deep inside, I've got what it takes. I am an artist.
Aww.
And so I was really delighted with a couple parts of this chapter, and I can't remember the exact moments, but you reminded me of it, where I was thinking about how he doesn't really give you this vibe that you need to feel bad that you make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
just to accept the fact that we are people and we will make them. Like,
Yeah.
he's definitely pushing communities and people of authority or teachers to look at themselves and really consider, like, you make mistakes. You do not consider yourself perfect, right? But I don't think he's trying to shame the person.
Right.
And so that's what I really appreciate about this chapter, is that he's saying people of authority Accept that you will make mistakes and just be aware of it. You are not infallible just because you have reached whatever XYZ level.
Yeah, there actually I remember a specific quote, and I have no idea which part it was in, where he was talking about, or actually no, it was a quote from somebody else. So maybe I can find it. Oh, maybe I can find it if I just page through it. Is it this?
It might be.
This last bit. As far as Buddha nature is concerned, there is no difference between a sinner and a sage. One
Yes.
enlightened thought and one is Buddha. One foolish thought and one is again an ordinary person.
Yeah. I just think that's such an important part of this process is realizing you're like a breath away from being right back where you started.
But also a breath away from
But also a breath away from
being
enlightenment.
back to the enlightenment.
Yeah, like
it's just I guess this is the whole foundation, like the entire first couple parts of the book, which were this isn't a straight line. It's gonna be kind of cyclical or like a spiral where you kind of dip back into some of these
oh, there it is. The paragraph on that page right on the left, bottom paragraph. A Zen master's life is one continuous mistake. That is an opportunity to learn one mistake after another. And that's so meaningful to me because that's what I'm trying to drive into my students.
yeah.
So hard. Like, this is such an important lesson. I think it's an important lesson for our spiritual journeys. I think it's an important lesson for us as humans and artists. And I really appreciated seeing it in this book. One, when I was reading it, just because I'd had a couple hard days this week, and this was really like when I had these words in my mind, it was like, okay.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how we know these things, but for some reason we need to be reminded of them
Yes.
all the time?
Because my brain dumb.
It's like I was reading something this week where someone was very distraught that they had made some kind of mistake. They didn't really know where they went wrong in their job, like a master's student who had messed up an experiment, and they're like, this is a multi-generational study, like I've completely ruined everything. There's no way we can possibly fix it because, you know, the previous generation that this is supposed to be from has died, and like I want to die, you know,
Oh, no.
my life is over, kind of like very dramatic thing. And people are like, dude, just tell tell the supervisor of this experiment, like tell the professor. You should just tell them what's happened and like fix it. Like it's okay. It doesn't. And he just kept going, no, I can't. I can't fix it. It's impossible. The generation's already dead, you know.
You
And
don't
then finally,
know.
after all this, they tell the professor, and they're like, "Oh, that's what you've been so upset about this whole week? Like, it's
Oh, man.
fine. We were gonna repeat this experiment anyway after it was done, so we'll just start over. Just
We were
forget
gonna
about it."
start over anyway.
Yeah, they're just like, "Oh, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just move on. Like, do it again. Learn. Just know you're gonna make mistakes sometimes. Like everyone's been there. And go eat something."
Go eat a snack.
Yeah, she was like, yeah, just chill out. We're gonna do it again anyway. Go have some lunch, and I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
And he was like, doesn't matter. It's not important. But that mindset is so consuming, like all consuming, as if no other moment of all of life exists or no other aspect of their life exists, and this is the only thing that matters. And it's so very, whether it's work or in a relationship or in art or in I mean, I'm sure you see this all the time with your students, like that mentality of like, oh, something has gone wrong in my life, which means my
Mm-hmm.
entire life is ruined and there's no point in going on. And it's like very
I can't even tell you the
teen
drama I
drama.
see happening in the fifth graders. Oh my goodness, it's a whole thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's this. Because they have the melodrama of a teenager, but the life experience of an elementary schooler. So it's just like even worse to me.
It's like this is literally the worst thing that's ever happened in my life, and you're like, it very well may
It
be,
might
but it's
be,
really not
but I
that
need you
bad.
to chill out about it. Like, time and a place, my friend. You're in the middle of art class. let's tone it down
let's
a little.
let's let's just draw out those
Let's
feelings.
make
You
art
know,
about it instead
let's
of
make art
pouting.
about it. I have a really great tool that can make you express yourself even better than with this tantrum.
You see how you're throwing a tantrum? Let's make art about it. Like I am
Oh,
so
now isn't that better?
I think I've said that phrase to a child before. If they're like, I don't know, blah, and I'm like, all right, let's make art about it.
It's good. It's true. Just let it out, you know?
Does this make me a good teacher? I don't know, but it's what I do.
Yeah. Whether or not it makes you a good teacher, as long as it is good for them to do. So, you know. It's a step. It's a step. Actually, maybe that ties into the back where we were.
Mm-hmm.
Uh in this page talking about acknowledging the needs of the body.
Mm-hmm.
We can't really expect that we're gonna truly reach any depth of like awakening or enlightenment if we aren't acknowledging that we do in fact have a body and we have emotions and we will respond to various things in our environments and in our lives. And also, he warns that if they're not acknowledged, they can be demonized and projected onto others, fueling paranoia, witch hunts, inquisitions.
I highlighted that myself because I was thinking about how quick you can be to be like, oh, you shouldn't do this. It'll ruin your spiritual practice. But then suddenly, if anyone's doing it, it's evil. Like, it's such a fast transition. It feels like for people to take that mentality, you start it, all right, well, maybe I shouldn't do that too. Nobody should do that ever. And if they do that, they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
You just more precisely, like, it gets demonized really fast sometimes. And I won't go into specifics, but I've come across people in chats on Discord occasionally, and I'm just like, I think you've taken this to an extreme. I need you to step back and maybe chill.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing people do. But that's the unchecked part, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
don't see everything, you're going to mess it up.
Right.
And for a lot of people, which you've also probably seen on Discord, because I think this is very prevalent online for the kind of people that tend to be online, is that they're not just demonizing those things when they're projecting onto others, but sometimes then when they do see them in themselves, get very like filled with self-loathing
Mm-hmm.
because oh this thing is so horrible and I'm like that and I'm the worst human being and I don't deserve blah blah. And instead of just being realistic, like, yeah, you have that too, because you're also human too, and there's
Right.
something you can do about it other than just hating yourself and villainizing yourself and saying you don't deserve anything good, and then usually isolating or just
Mm-hmm.
spending all their time complaining about themselves and
And
belittling
I've been
themselves.
guilty of this mindset for sure. Like, I can even recall like periods in my life where it was very consuming feeling,
Mm-hmm.
but those were definitely unhealthy times. Like, those are those were definitely, maybe I should be on medication.
Mm.
Kind of times in my life. Um, but I think that the compassion is also looking at somebody who's struggling with those thoughts and not immediately being like, yo, bro, stop. And so on the other end of it, I do struggle sometimes with skillful approaches to helping de-escalate someone's spiral. I struggle with that as a teacher with my students.
That's hard though, because it's gonna be different for most. Like, you don't always, unless they're really good at expressing themselves and sharing and being vulnerable, you might not really understand where it's coming from, so it's hard to de-escalate when it, kind of looks the same from a lot of different sources and a lot of different actual, like, in reality, what's going on in their mind and around them. Besides that, it's not even, I mean, it's also not your responsibility to do so, right? But
I mean, as a teacher, a little bit it is. But
sometimes.
Yes, so, sometimes it's
I mean,
not.
not to fix all their problems.
I will say, like, there wasn't one incident this week. I had a student. She was having, I don't know what happened with her and her friends. I got down, loaded her, and I was like, do you want me to try to fix it or just let you have some space? She did not respond, so I walked away and I just let her sit at that table for the rest of the class. And
then
so
the next day, was she fine? Like,
I haven't seen her. So I see my classes once a week.
oh, okay.
And so that's the difficulty with some of these situations. Some of it is like, I literally don't feel like sometimes that I see my students enough to insert myself in their drama, if that makes sense, or their social workings. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
especially
can't-
because of how fast it happens at that age.
Right. I can't assume I know every aspect of what's going on. I don't want to butt in where, ultimately she just needs to be sad for a minute and get over it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, it's a learning period.
It's a learning period. And then,
a little bit.
but as a teacher, I also can't let bullying happen in my room. I got to make sure students know that's unacceptable if that's what's happening. I struggle sometimes as a person in a place of authority is what is my responsibility to step in and when is it my responsibility to sit back and observe, and that's a struggle sometimes.
And maybe it's a little different depending on the student as well, right? Like, maybe one student would fare just fine on their own, or another one would be really struggling in the same situation.
Yeah.
That's really demanding, because that's a lot of students to know.
I have 430 students.
You have to, like, understand
It is...
which ones have the capacity for what, and...
Some of it, you can generalize a little bit. You're like, a first grader is not going to understand the nuance of certain things.
Sure.
But then a lot of times it is a lot of mental energy I spend just trying to decide if a fourth grader needs to be told the nuances of a situation or just told stop it.
Right. And the other issue is that not all kids develop at the same rate around that time, so they start to diverge, right? And they're like,
I think non-teachers often forget this, right? Like, they look at it like, well, you're this years old, you should be acting like this. Well, no, everyone kind of moves at a slightly different pace. Even developmentally speaking, if I look at just their evidence visually, like if I'm looking at drawings, not everybody's at the same developmental stage. I can't expect every fourth grader to perform at the same caliber, right? Because not everybody's at the same level or gotten to the same stage of development. Because as a traditionally trained art educator, I have studied these stages of development, right? And so I am aware that typically, if they're drawing like this, they're probably in this stage of development, they're probably entering this stage, right? And I can see how far or advanced a kid kind of is visually speaking. I'm remembering a conversation I had once with an adult, and I was like, if you draw something for me right now, I can tell you when you gave up on art. I can tell you about what age you were when you gave up.
Did they do it?
They did. And I had an age and they're like, yeah, that's when an art teacher told me I sucked. And I'm like, yep. Well, so that's typically that's a lot of what people's stories are when I talk to them of like if they were ever into drawing. It's because some teacher or someone broke their heart and said the wrong thing to them, and so then they gave up. And that stuck with them. And that evidence remains in their drawing skills because on some level, while we do regress a degree or two, the brain remembers.
Yeah.
But that's all. I'm sorry for that tangent. That was a whole other.
No, I don't mind the tangents. It's just us, so. I think that they're still relevant overall to the kinds of things that we talk about here. And that absolutely, even though this text is framed in a spiritual, like spiritual communities and relationships, it's not really just about that. Like there's always overlap, and I think in any field as well, we kind of distinguish between different areas, but they kind of all bleed into one another, don't they? Like it's not distinct. It's just useful for us to talk about certain things, but at the end of the day, your experience, the experience you are living in a role where you have authority and responsibility, but also that it's limited and you're interacting with other people who are in the middle of developing, and you're also, obviously much farther along than they are, but still working on certain things where, like, oh, you've gone really far in this area, but maybe you're struggling in this area, and recognizing that that's the case for everyone. I mean, isn't that kind of the point? I think it's relevant. Maybe it sounds kind of.
I see a lot of relevance, but I also have a stupid brain, so I don't want to assume everybody else is making 100 connections like I am.
Oh. I see the connection. We're good. We're good. Ah, I like that. I was gonna to continue that little tangent. I get a lot of people like streaming art. I get a lot of people who want to show me things that they're making, which is really great. I think it's one of the best things about streaming and making something is it makes other people feel like, oh, I want to make stuff. And
yes,
some of them work really hard at it, and some of them don't work very hard at it, and some of them, despite working hard, are really bad and can't seem to, like, it seems like they're just constantly relearning the same things over and over, and they really struggle. And some of these people are older than I am, and they still are, like, that's just how they are. I think that's just how their minds are. Or they,
I think also we get into this overlap, right? If we're talking about making connection to our tangential conversations in this more spiritual journey, is that the overlap is you're not just practicing, but you have to do skillful practice, or you have to do meaningful practice sometimes. I can't keep practicing sometimes the same things over and over. What I need to do is enrich my understanding of those things on a broader scale. And that applies both to art, I think also in our journey as we learn to expand our sense of compassion and our sense of mindfulness, right? Like I can't just keep practicing saying hello when I need to speak an entire language.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put that.
And so with art, I find with people, they just keep trying to draw the same thing over and over again. And maybe they will get good at that thing, but then they struggle with the other parts they want to do because they're not aware of how to practice in some ways. So to advocate for the sense of community, I think we get inspired off each other to practice in different ways that are more conducive to growth instead of being stuck in the same area,
Yeah. I've also found that, like, sometimes I try to help people, and in some cases it does help, and in other cases it seems like oh, they don't really get it. They're like, why don't they understand what I'm telling them, or why hasn't anything changed? And it's like,
I think sometimes
that's not the thing they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, it was too far, even farther ahead than where I thought they were. like, oh, surely they can understand this. If they just did this, it would be so much better. But the problem they're having is something so fundamental that even those technical adjustments won't actually fix
Mm-hmm.
or get them
Yeah,
to
I
the
think
next
as a
stage that they can move
teacher,
on.
in any sense of the word, it is absolutely incredibly easy to underestimate how far back in the process you need to begin an explanation. Because you have to scaffold their understanding, right? There's so many things to, like, I can't start teaching you to bake a cake if we're already mixing the ingredients in the bowl, right? Like, they're already being stirred. We need to talk about measurements. We need to talk about what are we putting in the bowl, what
Yeah.
order. And so it's, in any case, no matter what you're teaching, I think it's easy to underestimate that because we want to overestimate where people are starting. And I absolutely struggle with this as a teacher as well. Like, I don't always understand, like, how do I explain this concept? Because I just know. I've spent years thinking about it, so now I'm at a state where I just know the answer, right? But how do I explain how I got here, how to build their own understanding, how to get them here? Because those are different things, right? A
Mhm.
technically proficient painter is not necessarily going to be a good painting teacher. While as somebody who's maybe mediocre at painting can be an excellent teacher when it comes to just understanding how do I get from A to Z.
Yeah.
And I
To
think that,
show other people how to see.
mm-hmm, yeah, show other people how to see. I think that's a great way to put it. And I think that that's really important when we're going through this journey is sometimes we overfixate on getting to this like pinnacle of perfection of like, if I get there, then I can start doing the thing, whether it's in my journey or in my art, right? But the reality is, like, even though I'm not the most technically proficient person in certain forms of art, I can still teach them because the people learning from me are worse.
Yeah. You don't have, I mean, you can't expect them to be proficient after they finish your class, right?
Right.
So why does it matter if you're, making perfect flawless lines every time when like none of them are going to be able to do that regardless.
Right. Like, if I'm better than them, that's all that I needed to be.
If they left your class drawing as good as you can draw, you'd have done a good job.
Right. I've done it. Now someone else can take them the extra few steps, right?
Hmm.
I can be their step 1 or 2 or 3, however far I can take them. And then maybe their journey takes them somewhere else. Or they graduate from middle school.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We went way up.
No, these are all
Actually, look,
very
I know.
connected. People
It
just need to
is.
pay attention.
It is. Look, here, this says teacher right there.
Yeah,
The
I'm a
teacher in
teacher. It says
community.
teacher. This is
Live in
obviously on
deep in
task.
acknowledgement of human needs and emotions. They'll find a certain ease in these matters. Certainly, problems will arise, but they will be recognized as common problems, something everyone must encounter sooner or later.
Yes. See? I'm on task. I know what's up.
Yeah, we're right there. We're back in it.
Definitely in it. I'm all.
I only had a few more things anyway, so I think we're making good time.
Perfect.
Hmm. Where was the other bit? Actually, I think that's like nearly everything that I had highlighted. I had something at the end here. Yeah, here, like from truth telling and grieving to letting go and forgiving, we
Mm.
will need the support of our spiritual friends and the strength of our practice. We will need to find our own authority and our own greatness of heart. Be a lamp unto yourself. Make of yourself a light, were the last words of the Buddha. No teacher or outside authority can give us the truth or take it away. In the end, we will find that our heart holds the simple wisdom and unshakable compassion that we have sought all along.
Yes.
I feel this is really true for me.
I think that the further along you get on the journey of like peeling back the layers, the more you realize the answers are already there. And they, yeah, absolutely. I won't go on a tangent. I'll just say that I agree.
It's like yeah, also I feel very much like now when I look back on my life and experiences and things and I go, "Oh yes, the proof like that was there." When he says things like they don't see the shadow even when it's clear in front of them,
Yeah.
like in plain view, and then I can go back and go, "Oh, well now I can see it." And also, now if I see that in other people, like if I see somebody else in a situation that I've been in where I can go like, "Oh, that's
Oh.
what that is," and I
Mm-hmm.
can say something, but at the time, I didn't have the experience to recognize what it was in the middle of it, and then as things develop more or come clearer, and now I feel like, yeah, that peeling back the layers, it's like I'm in the middle and I can see all these other ones, and now you can see always at least to that depth, right?
Yeah.
And when you witness that elsewhere, like I wouldn't make the same mistakes
Yeah.
because I have learned how to recognize them. I mean, not that everybody does automatically by going through something. I think a lot of people repeat the same thing over and over quite often, expecting it to be different.
Unfortunately.
But it's a big thing to be like, actually, recently had a friend who was pointing out that I have made some mistakes in the past. And this is somebody I don't really interact with very often anymore. Like, we've been friends for a really long time. And our lives kind of like, I mean, we live in different places and we kind of grew apart, but we still, we still get along and there's like all that history, but we just kind of like don't do the same types of things on a day-to-day basis anymore and all of that. And then to be like, oh yeah, you've made mistakes in the past and a lot of times you do things and you don't tell me about them until you've actually done them, and it's like, well, that was a mistake. And it's like, I mean, yeah, but you can say that looking back, of course. Be like, oh, well, shouldn't have done that because it turned out bad. But I'm the one that's like, I mean, it's not like I'm blaming somebody else for it, right? Like, I'm the one that had to live with it. I'm the one that suffered through it the most. And I can recognize my own, which parts of it that I could have done something different and which parts that there's no way I could have, like, there's no possible way I would have been able to do anything about it, even if I had known what was
Generously, it
happening.
sounds like your friend just wants you to realize you have a village more than you might think you do.
Yes, that I can talk to people, but it's like, I mean, also, I'm not like, well, this person is being rude, and I'm not like, I still am like, yeah, they're looking out for me.
Yeah.
But it's a kind of, I don't know, it's an interesting thing to see yourself from somebody else's perspective. But I guess maybe like now in the context of this chapter, the idea that like somehow I've done something wrong because I've made certain mistakes in the past or errors in, or like sort of wishing that, or having a sort of good-hearted approach, like, oh, surely this person can like, this is going to be okay, like things will be better, and having
Right.
forgiveness for people, and giving someone the benefit of the doubt when maybe that person didn't really deserve to have more chances or wasn't really good enough to be able to overcome their problems, and you know like they're in a bad place and I can't really do anything about it. But it's a very odd thing to, because I'm looking at it like, you know, that's
Uh huh.
everybody does some kind of problem. Like everyone
Yeah.
has to make some kind of mistake. Even the people who are very careful and who look, and like watch others very closely and observe others and learn what kinds of things to avoid and red flags of things and live life very cautiously, like also make mistakes. And so it is possible to be too cautious about things and to miss out on life because you're hiding yourself away just in case something bad could happen, right?
Yeah.
And it's like a weird, it's a very, especially because I see myself as like having like really anxious and worrying about things all the time, and uh to then turn around and I don't know, be like, you're a person who makes a lot of mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
like, so I'm human? Like, were you seeing me before as like a, I don't know. Were we not like everybody else in your mind, and now you're like realizing that I am somehow? And I don't know. It's a just weird. It felt like kind of a weird disconnect between this kind of mentality where it's like no matter how far along you are on any path, you can always have a failing in some area, or there could be something from the past that still holds on you and that you have to work through, and that we're going to make mistakes, and it doesn't matter if you're 90 years old and a saint, you're still gonna be vulnerable, you're still going to be subjected to like human failings, and that's not a problem. It's okay. It's okay for that to be like that. It's inevitable for it to be like that. And that doesn't mean that like everything, I don't know.
Well said.
And I'm okay with it being like that. Like I have accepted that I am going to make mistakes, and that some of the things that I think are great ideas at the time could turn out to be not so good later, or could turn out to have, I don't know, like accidents could happen too. You do something that you think is going to be great, and then some completely unrelated accident could happen and change the situation to a point where now it kind of wish you didn't do that, right? Like, I mean, you could save a bunch of money, then quit your job to go follow your dream, and then find out that, I don't know, like that company you wanted to work for dissolves because they had a horrible scandal and they've been doing a bunch of illegal things and now they don't exist anymore. And now you're like, I mean, that puts you in a bad situation. Maybe you couldn't have known because none of that stuff was public. Like, that doesn't mean you necessarily did anything wrong. Like, you did your best with what you had. That's okay. And you have to sometimes take those kinds of risks.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then what about the case where that's not what happened?
Mhm.
And you've just lost out on, like, there's so many people that just live lives that they hate or that they're not really meant for, I
Mhm.
guess is a way of putting it, because they aren't willing to take any chance to get the thing that they really that would really be more fulfilling.
Right.
As long as you're okay with losing whatever things that you could lose, right?
It's a
Like
journey
know
no
what the
matter
risks are.
what you're, yeah, wherever you're going with it.